Anybody have any questions before we get started today? No? Okay, I have one. How good are you at case analysis? Why are you laughing, Julie?
Nothing. I just think that nothing.
Just sort of a random question?
Yeah, it was just random. And it implies that we're going to do a case analysis, I'm guessing?
Possibly, yeah. Yeah. The one professor at the American Business School in Paris wants to use a case, which I'm perfectly fine with. And I'm thinking about turning it into a competition, where it splits you into 4 teams of 6, and whoever he judges to do the best presentation gets exempted from the final paper. So, they haven't actually given me the name of the guy. They've just told me what he's going to do, so they haven't put me in direct contact with him. But in order to do that, you'd have to know something about actually doing case analysis pretty well. And so I'm trying to figure out if I have to insert well, maybe not a review, maybe a presentation on how you should attack a case. Because I'm sure some of you think you know how to do case analysis. But as far as what I would require in the capstone course when I was teaching it, I can assure you, you probably don't. So, but we'll see once I hear from the guy. So how many of you actually have ever done a case analysis? 2? Okay. So there'd be some work to do. But I think it might be kind of fun to do it that way. Because, of course, in America, we love competition, right? So I think it might be interesting. Okay. So, no other questions about anything else as far as what we're doing so far?
When do we expect our stuff to be graded? Look at that.
May.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I thought I might get around to some of it today, but for some reason, every day when I think I've got everything planned to how it's going to go, it just doesn't happen that way. So this weekend is looking pretty clear so far. I anticipate by this weekend I'll have it graded. And then I'll post the grades and send out either copies of the papers or give everybody hard copies. So we'll see how that goes. But yes, it's I don't think it's going to actually take me that long to grade once I sit down and get around to it. Any other questions? No? All right, then for today we want to talk about brand and product decisions in global marketing. And this comes down to a very basic decision about, can we use a standardized product, or do we have to adapt it to the local situation, the local culture, particularly if there's certain laws? So for example, are there requirements about what you have to have on a bicycle in terms of lights? The U.S. for a while, many years ago, used that as a non-tariff barrier to French bicycles coming into this country. We required them to have a special type of reflector on it, and the French were just aghast that you would put a reflector on a bicycle. They just wouldn't believe in doing that. So do you have to do those kinds of things, or is it something that's fairly standard that you can use anywhere in the globe? And at first you might say, well, yeah, there's certain things that will work that way. But when you start thinking about the metric system versus the US system, all of a sudden you're into a whole bunch of different sizes for how things are rated and how they're produced. So it's not necessarily as easy as you might think to be able to just standardize a product. So when we look at the actual product, we want to look at the idea, is it a consumer product or is it industrial? And typically, as a very generalized statement, you can probably standardize more industrial products than you can consumer products, because consumer products are much more tied into the local culture and how people view different types of products, allegiance to their home country products, what they're used to working with. So we want to think about the actual product. When we think about warranties, again, this comes into play as far as what the local laws are, because that will control what you can offer as a warranty, because they may have differing policies than we have in the United States as far as what's legal to do. But typically the companies themselves, if they can, they're going to use the same warranty because they don't want a bunch of different warranties floating around the globe. Packaging, typically going to have to adapt to packaging to meet the conditions in the local environment, particularly if you're talking about, and we can differentiate between So we can differentiate between the industrial or shipping packaging, that which we're using to actually move the goods, versus consumer packaging and what might be allowed. So for the United States, if you're going to send food products in here, you're going to have to follow our nutritional labeling laws. And if you're shipping products in that don't normally have that, you're going to have to adjust your consumer packaging. This type of packaging doesn't usually have to be adjusted as much because it's just used to move the product from one location to the next. Although you'll run into certain differences as far as types of pallets that are preferred in some countries and size of boxes, again, because they're doing it on the metric system. So you run into these different size boxes that you're not used to. But by and large, this is just the idea of moving product from point A to point B so it can be made available for sale. It's the consumer packaging where you're going to have to think about adapting it. Particularly if you think about going to some of the countries where retail shelf space is extremely limited, you might have to put it in smaller sizes. If you think about going to a country where they don't have the same amount of disposable income, you might have to sell it individually as versus in, like when we have a package of soap, for example, bar soap, when you can buy 10 bars, you might have to do those all singly because they don't have the income to be able to afford to invest in 10 bars of soap at once. So when we think about this, we're typically going to have to think about the consumer packaging is going to be have to adapt it for the consumer market. And again, last time we were talking a little bit, was the last time or the time before? Time before. About culture and colors. So certain types of colors that we might use as packaging here might be a really bad idea in certain cultures. So you want to think about that when you're looking at that. There's also and this goes actually back more to the industrial and shipping packaging. Certain countries now, for example, Germany has a very strict law as far as you have to return, if you're the manufacturer, all the packaging material that you have to guarantee that you've recycled it. And so there's a whole industry that's built up in Germany now to handle just the packing materials so that they don't go into a landfill and they get recycled. We don't have to do that here. So all of a sudden, if we're going to start having operations over in Germany, we're going to have to think about, well, how are we going to control all this? So somebody from a store, for example, goes and delivers a refrigerator. You don't leave the cardboard sitting by the side of the road for the garbage guy. You take it back to the factory and figure out how to recycle it. So that all adds a cost into the channel that you don't normally have here. Labeling. Adaptation, typically, because you're going to have to comply with regulations, and also the general idea that sometimes you're going to have to translate stuff, right? You're going to have to use a foreign language on your labeling, so you have to adapt that unless you want to really be ethnocentric about it and say, well, everybody speaks English around the world, right? And we're just going to leave everything in English, which is another bad idea. So you want to be aware of these types of decisions that we've got to think about. We also talked in culture about the idea of aesthetics, and so what is considered to be pleasing to the market where we're going. And it's not always going to be the same as what we're accustomed to here. So you may have to think about, do we need a different shape to our product packaging? So how it's going to be presented to those people. And does the product itself maybe have to be adapted? So for example, do the people have, if it's something we're going to handle a lot, do the people we're going to typically have smaller hands than we have? And it's not anything that we normally think about, but as one who's is losing dexterity in his hands as he ages, I can tell you how I feel about little buttons these days. and trying to manipulate those. So for certain types of cultures where the people are smaller or the people are typically larger, they're going to look at the aesthetics of something a little bit differently than we do. We can generally classify our products into one of these three general classifications. The idea of a local brand versus an international brand versus a global brand. So, local brand, single national market. So, it's very much tied to the local environment in which it is in. Doesn't mean that it can't branch out, it just means that we haven't. International brand can be in multiple markets. And then when we think of global brand, it can be in all regions of the world. So if you think about who's achieved global brand status, give me some examples. Yeah.
Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola, yeah. That's actually the first one that jumps into my mind when I think about products. What else? Yeah.
McDonald's.
McDonald's, absolutely. In fact, Tom Friedman in his book, The World is Flat, where he talked about what was happening as far as the economies blending together, he has what he calls his McDonald's law, which is any countries that have McDonald's have never waged war against each other. And you go, well, that's kind of weird. And then you think about it. But what it represents is that the people have moved up the socioeconomic ladder and they've got a more developed economy. They have a lot more to lose. And they start to go, you know, bombing the hell out of each other doesn't make a lot of sense. Because we're going to lose all the stuff that we have. What other types of products? Yeah.
Nike.
Yep, Nike definitely. How about foreign products that you recognize? Yeah.
Nestle.
Yep. Nestle would be a good one. Anybody drink Absolute vodka? It's a test. Now, if you think about something like that, is Heineken a global brand? Yeah. So there's a lot of different products that have achieved global status. And so when we think about how do you build a global brand, what's required? And this is not always necessarily easy to do, but you have to have a consistent value proposition. So the home country where it originates from, they have to be able to convince wherever they're going that the value proposition is exactly the same. You have to have attention to brand elements. So, for example, names, marks, symbols. Hopefully, regulations don't trip you up and somebody hasn't already illegal, well, not illegally, but sort of illegally, they've already registered your brand name. And then you got to buy it back from them. I mean, that happens sometimes in the international environment. Company-wide communication system, so everybody's got to be on board here to understand that we're promoting a global brand. The planning process has to be very consistent across all of them. You have to have responsibilities clearly delineated. And if there are local differences, so for example, Coca-Cola, does Coca-Cola adjust its formula for different markets? The answer is yeah. Not dramatically, but it does. And so they take that into consideration when they think about this. When we think about country of origin effect, there's been a lot of studies, a lot of academic studies done on the idea of country of origin effects, about how that influences you as a consumer, that you associate certain countries with certain types of products, and for good or bad. And so, examples of favorable country of origin, we've got things like German manufacturing. Okay, so if you go into an industrial setting and people start talking about German machinery, they're always in awe of it. They're always considered to be really good. Italian clothing is considered to be very stylish and always sort of leading the way. The Cayman Islands, if you think about services, well known for their offshore banking. Doesn't mean the governments like it, but they are well known for it. And then you can change this over time if you have a bad country of origin effect. So for example, I've mentioned before that Japanese manufacturing in the 50s and 60s, Japanese manufacturing was considered to be just terrible. And the first cars that they brought over here, nobody bought because they were terrible. Korean manufacturing, same type of thing. California wines, for a long time. And this is interesting since we'll be in France. But the French are, without a doubt, the leading wine snobs in the world, right? And so, and I say that very affectionately. But yeah, I mean, I remember when I was there in the first time in the 70s, if you mentioned you're from the United States, it was like, oh, Coca-Cola. And he said, well, yeah, California wine. They go, please, don't mention that. But, and it reminds me too, when I was teaching an executive MBA program at the University of New Orleans, one of the guys in the program was a sales rep for Ernest and Julio Gallo wines. And they developed Turning Leaf as a branded product. And at the time, my wife would have frequently purchased Turning Leaf, so I was aware of it. And I had no clue that it was tied to Ernest and Julio Gallo wines. And so we got talking about it, and he said it was very specifically done because of the reputation internationally of Ernest and Julio Gallo. It was just considered table wine that's not very good. So they wanted Turning Leaf to be the product that they were going to take and try to broaden the market. And he was telling me about when they got all the sales reps together out in California to discuss this, and whoever it was, Ernest or Julio, was still alive, and he was like, I think we should put the Gallo name on it. And then all the reps are like, no, don't. You know, and they had to offend the guy and say, look, it's not going to sell internationally if you put your name on it. You're very much pegged as an American wine of low quality. And so now, of course, California wines have won lots of international distinction. And the irony is that most of the well, not most, I shouldn't say that, I don't know that for sure, but many of the California vineyards can be traced to France. They use the vines came from France. And then, in a very odd thing that's not very well known, when the French vineyards were sort of ravished by disease, they took some of them back from California to repopulate the French vineyards. And so to me, it's always been sort of humorous that the French are like, oh, California wine is like, what are you talking about? You're using their vines now for your product. So you can run into these types of things as far as what people associate with. So if you had to think of a product right now, or from a country of origin, can you think of a country of origin impact that you associate, good or bad? Yeah.
Like Swiss chocolate?
What do you think about it?
Good.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, most people would agree. Regis?
Muscle cars in America.
Okay. Absolutely. Anything else? What about watches?
Swiss.
Yeah, you think of Swiss watches, right? If it says Swiss watch, everybody assumes that it's really good, right? Let's see, what else do we have? Well, bread.
Right.
Yeah, you think of French bread, right? Whether that makes sense or not. But a lot of people do think of it that way. If you think of British cooking and British restaurants, what do you think? You don't think about it at all, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the reaction. Because for the longest time, Britain was considered this place where food went to die. That if you were going to, I mean, I can remember the number of French people who would tell me they were going to go to England for vacation. They're like, oh, it's going to be fabulous except for the food. It's like, what are you going to do, pack a picnic hamper, take it with you? But they've made lots of strides in Britain since then, but for a long time, Britain just was not associated with having very good food. If you think about steak, anybody know which countries are associated with really good steak? Us in Argentina. Okay. Let's see. What other products do we have? Well, perfume. What do you think about when you think about perfume?
France.
Yeah. Think about France. There's many producers of perfume around the globe. There's no question about that. But you tend to think of France.
Well, like Brazil and coffee, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. If there's anything else I can think of, just off the top of my head. T.
British or England.
Yeah. So there's lots of different country of origin effects that take place, and you don't even necessarily think about them happening. All right, so when we look at this idea of global product planning, and this is one representation, 2x2 matrix, with product on the bottom and communication on the side. So the choice is standardize, which is same, or adapt, which would be different in this case. And so we can come up with 4 different strategies. And starting in the lower left-hand corner, we have the first strategy where we don't have to adapt anything. The product's going to be the same, communication message is the same. So if you think about, we had a slide last class that looked at computer chips and said, it's highly standardized, don't have to worry about it. Well, if you're selling these types of products, do you really have to change your communication message? Does a computer chip do something different because it's in Japan versus if it's in Chile versus being in the US? And the answer is no. So you can really fundamentally have the same type of thing as far as this goes, where you might have to adapt the communication from a language standpoint, but as far as the communication message, there's not much that changes, because when you think about it from a needs and benefits standpoint, like we like to do in marketing, there's nothing different about it as far as the person's concerned. If we go up here to strategy number 2, we're going to keep the same product, but we have to communicate the message a little bit differently. So, for example, the very first time I went to France, it was very strange, or at least I thought it was very strange, because they didn't snack at the time. An American snack all the time, right? And so it was very strange to try to find snacks. I mean, they had chips, they had pretzels and things like that, but they tended to eat them with the meal. They had some small bags. If you went to a gas station, they would have smaller bags. So it wasn't that you didn't see people eating them, but generally speaking, as a culture, they just didn't snack between meals very much. And so if you're going to try to communicate, you're going to try to take something over to France from the US as far as some sort of snack, you're going to have to communicate differently, because they wouldn't understand the message that we would have, because it just culturally wouldn't make sense to them. Like, why are we eating this now? So you have to think about, how are you going to communicate to a different population in order to get your message across for this product, particularly if you think about it, if it's a product they've never seen before. It's not that people won't adapt products. When we look at the adaptation rates of countries, some countries are more disposed to rapidly adapt and assimilate products than others are. But generally speaking, you have to be able to communicate, well, what is it this product does for you? Even if the product itself is not adaptive, if it's something they're not familiar with, they're going to have a hard time with that. If we look in the lower right-hand corner for strategy number 3, where now we're going to adapt the product, so we're going to adapt it, but the message is still the same. It's still directed to fill the same need or benefit in the foreign culture as it does in the domestic one. But as far as being able to communicate what's going on, that's okay, that's fine. But the product itself needs to be changed in some manner so that it's going to work in the foreign culture. And again, this can be something like size, aesthetics, things of that nature. May need to be a voltage situation because of different power currents that's used in different countries. So it can be all of those types of different things. If you think about, I have an electric razor sitting somewhere buried in a drawer at home that I bought when I was living in the Netherlands. And I'm sure that it still works. I don't think I've used it in 15 or 20 years now that I'm thinking about it. But if I were to use that, I never used it at home because once I came back, because I didn't want to haul out an adapter every time to use it. But I mean, it's a Philips product. It's not that Philips doesn't sell razors in the U.S. They obviously have adapted their products for the U.S. market and the different current that's necessary. But the message is still the same. A razor is pretty much designed to remove hair. So just because you take it someplace else, it doesn't radically change. And you go, oh, well, this razor does something what? I mean, it doesn't change. It's designed to remove hair. And then if we go up to strategy 4, then we've got to adapt both the message and the product itself. And so when we get into this is the one that's going to perhaps be a little more challenging, probably more expensive to do, because now we have to look at this and figure out, okay, how do we adapt the product and how do we get the message across? So, for example, so think about a message that might have to be adapted because of legal requirements. So let's say we're used to doing comparative advertising in the United States. You can go to some places around the globe where they don't allow that kind of advertising. So all of a sudden, we've got to change the message because we can't compare it against our competitor now. Now we have to figure out how do we get somebody to like our product more, but we can't do the direct comparison type ads that we've always done in the past in the United States market. And then the product itself we have to think about because we've adapted it. So does that change it, and does that change the message as far as what we're going to do? So these are all things that you have to think about that normally you don't really give any consideration to when you're in the domestic market. So when we're looking at this, these factors, the idea, you've got to look at the product itself, and you have to look at the function and the need it fulfills. And does that need or function transfer very nicely over into the destination culture where you want to do this, or into the global marketplace? And of course, many, many products do, because many needs and benefits are very similar. You know? If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the very basic ones of food and water and clothing, they're all pretty universal to human beings. They all pretty much need that. It's when you get further up on his diagram that you have to think about, well, what do people really value in terms of different types of products, the aesthetics of it, etc., performance. What's the market and its characteristics? And we'll talk a little bit more about this idea in next class when we talk about pricing. But keep in mind that the market is going to be very important as far as their level of affluence or lack thereof. So when we're used to selling products for a certain price in this country, it just may not be possible in the destination country because they may not have the money to be able to afford it. And then what are the characteristics of those markets? Are they, do they have the same type of infrastructure that we're used to in this country? Or somehow is the product represented differently? It's a different channel mechanism that they use to sell through. And then what's going to be the adaptation and manufacturing costs of the company? So at some point you have to also do a cost-benefit analysis for the company. If we're going to go abroad with this product, how much money are we going to make off of it? And we have to, if the adaptation costs are so expensive, it may not be worthwhile to do so. So those are all things we want to think about. And then of course we have a fifth strategy, which is the idea of innovation. And this is one of the areas where the truly global companies have a huge advantage because they're pulling in brain power from around the globe. And so, although we tend to think of adaptation in the home country, for a global country, that's not how they think about it at all. They think about it as being able to harness the brain power from wherever they've got people in the world that can put forth ideas and put them into our product planning process. So innovation is one of these ways that global companies can really move. And you can have the discontinuous innovations, the brand new product that nobody's ever really thought of, that it really changes the lifestyle. So you can almost, in a sense, think about smartphones being like that. That wasn't that mobile phones didn't exist. I can remember using my boss's car the one time. He had a car phone, and a friend and I were in the car, so we just started calling some of our friends because we thought it was so funny. Didn't realize it cost like $4 a minute. He pointed that out to us once he got the bill. paycheck went down quite a bit at that time. But if you think now, like what you can do with a cell phone, it's absolutely amazing. And then we can look at the dynamically continuous innovations, where you just keep making changes, and computers would fall into this category where first you have the discontinuous innovation, and now they just keep doing more and more things with them. And then you can have the continuous innovation to your own product line. So you decide what you're going to do. Previous generations, you might diffuse those out into other countries that are not as wealthy and haven't necessarily adapted the product yet. And so as you generate, you put the new generation in your home country, and your earlier generations are the ones that you use around the globe. Or if you're a truly global company, you might just roll out the brand new product all at the same time. All right, any questions about that? That represents the major differences, because remember, what I'm trying to emphasize here, rather than having a partial repeat of principles of marketing in every class session, is to emphasize those parts that are different when we're thinking about international marketing versus just marketing in general. So if there's no questions, that's going to be it for today.